My name's Ray Fennick. I'm 58 years old, and for 30 years I drove road trains, 3, sometimes 4 trailers hooked up behind a Kenworth, from Port Augusta up through Coober Alice Springs, and all the way to Darwin. If you've never seen the Stuart Highway at 4 in the morning, with nothing but red dirt and stars in every direction, you don't really know what silence sounds like. I want to tell you what happened last December. But to understand why I hurt the way it did, you need to understand what 30 years on that road actually costs a man, and what I built out of it, quietly, without anyone in my family knowing. I started driving at 26. Before that I worked on my uncle's cattle station out past Long Reach, mustering, fixing fences, learning what it means to work when nobody's watching and nothing's easy. When the station got sold up, I needed steady money, and a mate got me a start with a transport company running freight between Adelaide and Darwin. My wife, Deb, was pregnant with our daughter Chloe at the time. I won't pretend the job was glamorous. 2, sometimes 3 weeks away at a stretch. Sleeping in the cab at rest stops outside Marla or Old Dunda. Eating servo pies and instant coffee at 2 in the morning because that's what was open. Missing birthdays. Missing school assemblies. Missing the small ordinary Tuesday afternoons that you don't think matter until they're gone. But here's what nobody in my family ever saw. Every single dollar I earned on that highway, I put somewhere. Deb and I agreed early on, we'd live modest, and we'd build something for Chloe's future, quietly, without making a big song and dance about it. I picked up shares in the transport company I drove for, back when it floated small on the exchange. I bought a rundown roadhouse outside Glendambo in 1998 for almost nothing, fixed it up on my days off, and leased it out.
Then another one near Marla a few years later. By the time Chloe finished uni, those 2 roadhouses and my shares were quietly worth more than most people's superannuation. I never told her. Deb knew, obviously. We built it together. But to Chloe, growing up, I was just Dad who's always driving trucks. She used to tell her school friends her father was a delivery driver. A bit embarrassed, I think, compared to her friends' fathers who were doctors and accountants in Adelaide. When Chloe met David, good bloke, worked in finance in Adelaide, I was proud. When they got married, I paid for half the wedding without telling David's parents where the money actually came from, because Chloe didn't want them thinking her Truckie father had paid for anything. I let her tell people it was from her and David's savings. When they bought their first house in the eastern suburbs of Adelaide, I quietly transferred $42,000 into their account as a gift, which Chloe told David was an inheritance from her mother's side of the family. It wasn't. Deb's family never had 2 cents to rub together. It was roadhouse money. When their first daughter, my granddaughter Mia, was born, and later her brother Tom, I paid the school fees for both of them at a well-regarded private school in the eastern suburbs, nearly $11,000 a year per child for years. Chloe told her friends David's bonuses covered it. David, to be fair, never actually knew where all of it came from either. Chloe managed the household finances and simply never corrected the story she'd built. I didn't do any of this for credit. I did it because that's what you do for family. You carry the weight quietly so they never have to feel it. That was the whole philosophy of 30 years on the highway. You show up. You don't complain. You don't ask for thanks. Last December, Chloe hosted Christmas at their house. A beautiful place, plantation shutters, a pool, the whole picture. David's parents were there, his sister and her husband, a few of David's colleagues from the finance firm who'd become close family friends over the years. I drove down from Alice Springs specially, 2 days on the road, to be there. Somewhere between the turkey and the pavlova, David's father asked me what I used to do for work, in that slightly condescending tone some city people get around blokes like me. I told him straight, 30 years running road trains across the Outback. He nodded politely, the way you nod at something you don't quite respect. Then Chloe, my daughter, 31 years old, standing in a kitchen I'd quietly helped pay for, laughed a little and said, "Dad was always more about the truck than the family, to be honest. Growing up, he was just never really there. He never really provided, not in the way that mattered." The room went a bit quiet. David's mother gave me a sympathetic look, like I was a charity case being humored. David's sister said something about how it must have been hard growing up with an absent father. Chloe didn't correct any of it. She let the story stand, that I was a truck driver who was never around and never really contributed, while David's family, the real providers, looked on with polite pity. I said nothing. I finished my slice of pavlova, helped clean up the kitchen like I always do, hugged my grandkids goodbye, and drove back to my motel. I didn't sleep much that night. Not out of anger, out of clarity. 30 years of showing up quietly, and in one sentence, in front of people whose respect she seemed to want more than mine. My own daughter had erased it. Not maliciously, I don't think. She probably didn't even register what she'd said. But that's exactly the problem. She'd built a whole story about her life where I simply didn't count, and she'd never once questioned where the money for the school fees, the house deposit, half a wedding, actually came from. I want to be clear about something. This was never about anger. 30 years on the highway teaches you patience most people never learn. You can't outdrive a road train's momentum. You plan, you brake early, you think 3 kilometers ahead. That's how I handled this too. 2 days after Christmas, back in Alice Springs, I sat down and went through every single thing I'd been quietly paying for. The school fees, due again in 6 weeks. A standing transfer of $800 a month I'd set up years ago to help with their mortgage repayments, which Chloe had told David was covered entirely by his salary. The private health insurance policy for both grandkids, which I'd been paying since they were born. Even the lease payment on the roadhouse near Marla, which I'd quietly been letting David's cousin manage at a mate's rate as a favor to keep peace in the family, worth more to them than they realized. I didn't cancel it all in a rage. I did something more deliberate. I rang my accountant, a woman named Patricia I've worked with for 22 years, and I asked her to draw up a complete, honest ledger, every single dollar I'd given Chloe and David over the past 10 years, documented properly, dated, itemized. Then I asked her to help me formally close out every standing arrangement, cleanly and correctly, effective from the 1st of February. I also did one more thing. I'd been planning, for the past 2 years, to eventually hand over the 2 roadhouses and my shares in the transport company to Chloe as an inheritance, the whole point of 30 years of quiet building. I rang my solicitor and told him to hold that plan. Not cancel it. Just hold it. Because if my own daughter genuinely believed I'd never provided anything of value, then perhaps she needed to actually live a season of her life without the invisible scaffolding I'd built under her, before I decided what, if anything, came next. The school fee invoice bounced back unpaid in early February. Chloe rang David in a panic, not realizing I'd been the one covering it for 6 years. That conversation, I'm told, was the first time David ever heard the words roadhouse and shares in the same sentence as his own mortgage. The mortgage shortfall hit in March. $800 a month doesn't sound like much until it's suddenly not there and you've built a lifestyle assuming it always would be. Chloe called me. First time in months it wasn't just a birthday text. She didn't shout. She sounded genuinely confused, almost hurt, like I'd done something unfair. I told her the truth, calmly, the way I'd tell a bloke on the 2-way radio bad news about a washed-out road ahead. I told her I loved her. I told her I'd spent 30 years on a highway most people are too frightened to drive at night, so that she'd never have to worry about money the way I once did on my uncle's station. And I told her that a man who never really provided doesn't have a ledger going back 10 years with her name on almost every page. I sent her the ledger. Every dollar. Every date. I didn't say it with anger. I said it the way you read out a manifest before a long haul, plainly, factually, because the facts speak for themselves if you let them. She cried on the phone. Not performance crying, the real kind, the kind that comes when a story you've told yourself and everyone around you for years quietly falls apart in front of you. She said she didn't remember it that way. I told her that was exactly the problem. She'd never had to remember it, because I'd never made her carry it. That was the whole point of 30 years of silence. And that silence had let her build a version of me that was easier for her to feel superior to. I haven't cut Chloe off from my life. I still ring her every Sunday arvo, same as always. I still send Mia and Tom cards on their birthdays with a bit of cash tucked in, because they're kids and none of this is their doing. But I haven't restarted the standing payments. Not out of spite, because for the first time in her adult life, Chloe and David are having honest conversations about what they can actually afford, together, as a family, instead of quietly assuming a truck driver who was never really there had nothing to do with any of it. As for the roadhouses and the shares, I've told my solicitor to revisit the plan later this year. Maybe I'll still leave it all to Chloe. Maybe I'll split it differently, between her and the grandkids directly, in a trust, so it's protected properly regardless of what story gets told about where it came from. I haven't decided yet. For once in 30 years, I'm not in a hurry to plan 3 kilometers ahead. I'm just watching the road, seeing what's actually coming, before I decide where to go next. People ask me if I regret staying quiet all those years, letting her believe what she believed. I don't. I regret that I let her go 3 decades without ever once having to ask herself where the ground she was standing on actually came from. Some lessons, the highway teaches you, can't be rushed. You brake early. You let the dust settle. And eventually, if you're patient enough, the truth catches up with everyone, same as it always does out there, somewhere past Coober Pedy, under all that empty outback sky.